What is going on, everyone? Anthony Drew Gary here, host of the How To Show, where we talk about optimizing life, money, and happiness one how to at a time. At the end of last year, I recorded a 5-part series on how to go to college for as little student debt as possible, and I'll link to the playlist overhead if you've not seen that video series yet. But while I was talking about going to college, I realized that I never spent any time on study abroad or international travel or things that a college student may get to experience during the college years. However, I would like to spend this episode talking about opportunities to do that after college. And so this episode is going to be about how to study abroad without having to study. So for this episode, I'm going to have a guest star. Her name is Monica, and she is well versed in international travel, and she has an interesting way of how she sets these trips up that I think will add value to our audience. It's become common for Monica to post pictures either with the Eiffel Tower in the background, or the pyramids in the background, or some wonder of the world that I've never even heard of. This is the type of stuff that I see, and I want to learn how she's doing it. And more importantly, I want to be able to share it with my audience because I feel like it's something that's replicable and maybe it'll make an improvement in our lives. So without further ado, let's bring on Monica. Monica, welcome to the How To Show. World traveler, how are you?
Wonderful. How are you doing?
So far, so good today. So talk to me, talk to everyone. How many trips outside the country have you taken and how many countries have you been to?
So I've probably taken about 5 to 6 international trips, and about 20 countries.
Oh wow! So you've been to a lot of places. That is really cool. How do you set one of these trips up? Do you do all the work yourself and do all the legwork and piece it together, or do you have some sort of a facilitator that does this for you? What's that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I have far too much anxiety and control issues to book an entire international trip myself. It just seems like quite the undertaking and pretty stressful. So I book through a tour company that I had actually found a long time ago when I was looking for study abroad programs.
Okay.
And some of the study abroad programs that I had found had included, which sounds terrible, but it was mostly classroom activity and it wasn't a whole lot of exploration, which was more what I was looking for. So I had stumbled upon at the time, I believe I was 19 years old, so it was quite some time ago. I stumbled upon EF College Break, which at the time was for 18 through, I believe it was 28 at that time. And what they do is they essentially organize the trips for you. And they have an unlimited amount of trips you at pretty much anywhere you could imagine. And you just go to the website, and I think you put like $100 down, and you were ready to go.
Okay, so take a step back. This sounds like it has some study abroad features to it, but this isn't tied to any sort of college or any specific school, anything like that, right?
No, and actually, EF College Break has since changed their name to EF Ultimate Break because I think there was that misconception that there was a study component or that you had to be enrolled in college to participate in it.
Okay. So how long is a typical trip? How much ground do you cover? Do you go to one country at a time per trip, or do they lump several things that are nearby one another?
It really depends on your preference. They have trips that are like 10, 11 days, and they have trips that are 3 months. So it really depends on how much availability you have, how much time you can get away from work, which I do not have 3 months. But you do go to multiple countries. It just depends. I've gone on trips that are just 2 countries for 10 days, and I've gone on trips that are what felt like all of Europe in 28 days. So it just depends what kind of adventure you're looking for, really.
That's impressive, and it sounds like there are a lot of different opportunities and something for everyone. So when you go on one of these trips, it sounds like you're not going by yourself. It sounds like a group of people or maybe all starting at the same point. How do you get together? Do you all meet at the same airport in America and then you go? What's that logistically look like?
So I previously used to sign up alone because I don't have a lot of friends that travel internationally to that extent. So I found myself signing up alone most times, which can be intimidating, but ended up working out wonderfully. But you all meet at the airport of your first stop. So on my first trip, we all met in Amsterdam, and you arrive at the airport, and you look for your tour director. There's usually somebody, with a sign that, says EF college break. And then you all gather, and one of the first things they do is, once you take a bus to your first hotel, you all meet for like a welcome drink or a welcome dinner. And that way you get to, become acquainted with the people that you might be spending the next 28 days with in very close quarters.
Okay. So you mentioned travel director, and you also started on the path of my next question, but talk to me a little bit about travel director, what their role is, and then bring it into, you mentioned hotel. Is that the common accommodation, or are you a combination of hotels, hostels? You staying with any foreign prince that you've been able to stay with for the majority of your trip? What's that look like on that end?
So it really depends. So when I was traveling with EF College Break, which is now EF Ultimate Break, which again at the time was 18 through 28, which is now I think they moved the age up to 30 or 32 actually. But because it's a younger group, you will find yourself in more of like hostels and things like that, which can be you have to have the comfort level for that. You have to say that, like, I'm going to be okay with being in a room with six other girls for 3-4 days or however long you're in that city. And then sometimes, depending on the location, we stayed in really nice hotels. So it really just kind of depended. With go ahead tours, which is mm, the age bracket that I am now traveling in, because I have aged out of EF Ultimate Break, because it is typically older individuals that may be out of that stage where they're wanting to sleep in a hostel with several other people. So I guess it just depends on what type of travel you're looking for.
Okay, so it sounds like there are two different companies that both cater to their demographics, but do the same types of international trips in a curated way that takes a lot of the stress of planning that sort of a trip. And
Yes, and they are sister companies, so the companies are related, so which is beneficial. So I guess just to touch base a little bit about how the process works, which I think is one of the bigger barriers to most people traveling, is cost, and the logistics of it. So with both tour companies, you go online, you pick your trip, and you can book online or you can book over the phone. And for EF Ultimate Break, it's $400 down to book your trip, or 150. No, I remember it's been a little bit. And then for Go Ahead, I believe it's $400 to hold your trip. And moving forward, it's monthly payments.
okay,
So, which is beneficial because I have never in my life had, just like 5-6 grand lying around to just, go on a European vacation randomly. So it helps to have that payment plan.
sure, we'll dive into the cost a little bit later. But before we get there, do you have to speak the language of the natives for any of these different locations, or is that something that you can rely upon the folks that are going with you and the tour directors to make sure that you're not going to get lost somewhere where you don't know how to communicate with anyone?
Yeah. So um, a lot of the places I traveled, most of the individuals speak English. Not necessarily fluently, but enough that you would be able to navigate most situations. And the tour director that will be accompanying you for the trip is fluent in the language of the places that you are going. So that's also helpful. And going back to kind of your question about the tour director, is depending on where you're at, is depending on the how involved the tour director is, right? I've had trips in Europe where they're like, okay, you have a day free, go do whatever you want, and if in the younger groups especially, it's like, if you want to go out to the bars, you want to go out to the clubs, you meet downstairs at 9, we'll all go and they go with you and everyone has a good time. In the trip in Egypt I just went, there's a little less of that leadway, obviously, because there are safety concerns sometimes.
Yeah.
So the tour director is more involved. It is more group focused, like, okay, we're going here now, we're leaving here now. And there's less time for you to just kind of wander about. I think it just depends on the type of tour that you're on and where you are.
Yeah, I think it makes perfect sense. The different trips, different types of scenarios would require different levels of care on behalf of the folks that are putting these trips together. So talk to me about, 28 days is a long time to be away from home. Are you packing just a backpack and roughing it, or are you taking, your two carry-ons and your three bags that fully encompass your Ralph Lauren travel suitcase scenario? What's that look like? How well do you get to be comfortable while you're traveling?
So, my first trip, I packed everything because, of course, I was going to need every possible article of clothing for every potential situation I might encounter. Ballroom gowns, all of those things were going to be entirely necessary on this trip. Luckily, by the time I got to the 28-day trip, I had learned from previous trips not to do that. So, what I recommend is a carry-on and a personal item, which I usually bring as a backpack.
Yeah.
So I will take a small carry-on that has rolled very tightly my clothing for the month. And then I always recommend that in your personal item, so in my case, a backpack, you pack enough clothes in case of an emergency. So I don't have that problem because I don't check my bags. But on the 28th trip that I was on, we had a situation where people did not pack anything outside of their checked bag, and their baggage got lost.
Yep.
And it was found, luckily, but the issue in getting it back to them was that we moved cities every 2-3 days. So they found their bags. We were in Ireland. They sent them to Ireland, but we already got to London. So their bags were like chasing them. So they were, borrowing clothes and trying to find stores and, get together some some clothes to get them through the next few days. So the less the better in regards to packing always, because you're moving around a lot, you're walking a lot. Sometimes some of the streets are narrow, especially in Europe. So especially if you're in a tour bus, they can't get down all those tiny little cobblestone roads to the hotels and things. So you might be walking uphill, for half a mile with your bags, and it sucks. So it's always best to just pack lightly. It's less to keep track of. It's less to carry, and you don't really need most things that people pack anyway.
It makes sense, and those are awesome tips. So thank you for sharing them. So when you're on these trips, do the places that you go, do you usually stick to touristy type scenarios, or do you get in the weeds or in the inner cities of places where you can really immerse yourself with what's going on above and beyond what the typical tourist might see?
Yes. So I think the first time I went, I was a little nervous to branch out on my own because I was young and I didn't know what was happening. I don't think I'd ever really been outside the country, so it's quite terrifying. But my second time to Europe, I definitely branched out more. So, for example, the first time I was in Paris, I followed the tour group exactly. I didn't stray. I did the touristy things, right? We went to the Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, saw the Mona Lisa, which is really disappointing, just so everybody knows. And we did all those things. It was great. It was a wonderful experience. But the second time I was in Paris, and they were doing all of those things, I was like, I've already done these things. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go do something else. And I ended up getting fondue right near the Notre Dame Cathedral, and then I walked into a piano bar and listened to these amazing musicians play music. And I drank probably an entire bottle of port wine, and it was a wonderful time. And I got to converse with the locals and really get immersed more into the culture. Not that the touristy things aren't important; you should see them, but part of traveling, I think, is branching out a little bit more.
I agree with you, and that's good insight. So, what's besides an entire bottle of port wine? What's the craziest thing you've eaten on one of these trips abroad?
Oh, well, it's probably between Egypt and Thailand. In Thailand, I had worms and like a dehydrated frog leg. It's very strange. And I ate a roach.
Okay.
That was up there. And then in Egypt, I had a pigeon, which was also, and it tasted like a Cornish hen. It was actually very good. But when you tell somebody you eat pigeon, it's questionable. It's hard to wrap your head around sometimes.
You have exceeded my expectations. I laughed out loud at some of the things you were eating internationally. I'll have to try them one day.
Yeah, yeah,
So
delicious.
along the lines of the craziest thing you've ever eaten, what happens if on one of these trips you get a stomach bug? The trip obviously doesn't stop for you. How do you manage?
Well, I can tell you because I got sick in Egypt. So, um, and I think it was really more of cold than a stomach bug, but it's hard to tell because I was eating so many weird things, and but you do what you can. I guess it depends on the severity of the illness. Again, being on a tour group partly is really supportive because a lot of people, as soon as I got sick, were like, "Oh, I have packed an entire, trove of medicines." So, and I had a lot of older people on my last tour group in Egypt. So they're like, "I have so many Rolaids. Don't even worry about it." And I've never personally had been so ill on a trip where something's happened, but I have been on tours where people have gotten, very intoxicated and fell off of bars and got concussions. And, I think that kind of happens when you're on the 18-year-old younger tour group where, maybe people haven't ever experienced alcohol and, go to a foreign country where the drinking age is 18. So that's happened, but we haven't really had any severe medical issues on any of the groups I've been in, at least.
Got it. Now, you mentioned down payments and monthly payments. Let's dive into that a little deeper if you don't mind. And obviously, different trips to different locations are going to cost different amounts, but can you start to describe what the costs look like? Let's use the most recent trip you went to Egypt, if you don't mind. Talk to me a little bit more about what that trip entailed, how long it was, and what it cost, and what you think that, hypothetically, how much you think that trip was cheaper because you went through one of these programs maybe than if you were to try to piece it all together yourself?
Yeah. So Egypt was one of the pricier trips that
Okay.
I've been on. Europe is more affordable. Um, Egypt was a little bit more pricey. I'd say it was probably in total around 5 grand.
Okay.
I booked it maybe over a year in advance. So I booked it, I put 400 down, and then they calculate a monthly payment plan for you. So I think my payments were at the time maybe like 250 a month or 230, somewhere around there, kind of like a car payment, really.
Okay.
um and part of that though, and I think in looking at the cost is it might, maybe it would have been cheaper if I had booked it myself, but there were a lot of things that would have been very stressful for me to do because within Egypt there were a lot of flights. So I got to Cairo, and then we flew to Luxor, we flew to Abu Simbel, we flew to Jordan. So it wasn't just like getting to Egypt. There was travel within the actual tour group that would have been possible for me to book, but it would have been time consuming. And I think it's more, are you looking to, be very affordable and save the most money you can, or are you looking for convenience? And
Yeah.
I was definitely looking for safety and convenience. So it helped me.
Yeah, and that ties into really the purpose of this episode. I think that the value in this sort of scenario is the safety and the convenience. And, that's probably a lot of the reason why study abroad is so attractive to college students. But
Mm-hmm.
this presents an option where study abroad, you basically get all of the best of the study abroad experience with none of the homework, none of the classwork, and none of the tuition. So,
Right. And and I think the element that I really enjoy about it is the people, the tour directors are very knowledgeable. So my tour director in Egypt was amazing, and she had a PhD. She was an Egyptologist. So we would go to a temple and she would tell you what every hieroglyphic meant, the entire history of the temple, everything about the pharaoh. So it was educational. It wasn't just kind of wandering and nobody knew what what they were looking at. And you're like, oh, pyramid, cool. she was able to provide the history behind it, which is important to me because I enjoy history, and part of traveling for me isn't just seeing things or seeing sites or the touristy things. It's the education behind it too. So I to speak to the convenience and the safety, very safe, very convenient. I'm sure you could save a few bucks if you booked it yourself, but there were things personally I did not know in Egypt that she had to tell me. Small things like I wanted to go for a camel ride, and they're like, "Oh, it's only 20 in their currency," and I was like, "Oh, that's so cheap." And she was like, "Ah, wait, you get on the horse or the camel, I'm sorry, and you pay 20. But when you go to get off, they tell you that in order to get down, you have to pay so much more money." I would have no idea about that. Like they would have scammed me blind. Like I would have been stuck on a camel, broke, like trapped. And there's ways that they get you if you don't know things like that. So it's helpful to have somebody, she lives in Cairo, she knows the city. Um, because it is easy to kind of be the foreigner that gets targeted for silly things like that.
Absolutely. It makes perfect sense. So, Monica, I've got two more questions for you. Number one, you mentioned the name of this tour company a couple of times, but can you reiterate that? And I believe you're going to send me a link so that I can put it in my show notes that'll allow people to check out exactly the types of trips you've been going on.
Yes. So they are sister companies. So the first one, which is 18 through I believe 32 now, is EF Ultimate Break. That again, 18 18 to 32, and smaller down payments because the demographic. And then the second tour group is Go Ahead Tours, and that is for older ages.
Okay. Does that start at 32 or do they overlap some?
I think there's definitely some overlap. I don't know how. I don't know if there's an age cutoff. I'm sure you have to be at least 18 to do the Go Ahead Tours.
Yeah.
They are slower paced than the younger tour groups. They are very fast, very quick moving, city to city. Go Ahead's a little bit more slower paced.
Gotcha. And the second question, where can people find out more about you? Do you have an Instagram handle? I can link to that too.
Yes, it's Monica Marie Torres. So just my full name.
All right, we'll link to that in the show notes. Monica, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you for joining me on the How To Show. It has been a blast.
Thank you for having me. Safe travels.
All right, thank you. All right, special thanks to Monica for joining me on this episode of the show. Hopefully you were able to take some actionable tips away that might be able to help you in your international travel one day. And if you learned something in this episode, please leave me a comment about it. If you haven't done it already, you know it's not too late to smash that like button. And if you're not subscribed, please go ahead and subscribe. You can be the first to know about new episodes that happen every Wednesday. And if you have an idea for a future topic on the show, please leave me a comment. I love reading those. Until next time, this is Anthony Drew Gary, host of The How To Show, signing off. I've never actually done a blooper reel. Here, we're starting this off great. Never actually done a blooper reel for the show, but I have a how-to story that I think is too good to keep to myself. It was freshman orientation at Ball State University, and my dad and I were sitting in Pruis Hall, and all of the people on the stage were talking about this, that, and the other, and somebody shouts out from the stage, "Who is interested in study abroad?" And all these people raise their hand. They do one of these. Well, my dad leans to me and he says, "I hope you study more than one." And I look at him and I start laughing, and that's the relationship that I have with my father, and I love it. Dad, if you're watching, this one's for you.